Hello and welcome back to the Editorial, the podcast where we apologise for all of our mistakes and admit to not being as smart as we sometimes look. I'm joined today, as always, by Zach Michaelis.
Hello. Do we look smart?
I don't know.
I think as smart as we think we are.
We try and project smart. We sit behind a desk.
That's true,
pretty
actually.
smart.
We put a lot of effort to
Yeah.
making smart.
We try to have the aura of smart.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Apart from the outfits.
People still look at us as children, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, I think
And
I still
I don't
think.
know
I don't know why anyone trusts us.
I don't know if that's necessarily a wrong assumption, yeah. Anyway, in these episodes, we always run through all of the videos we've done in the last 2 weeks since the previous episode and discuss the videos that fell below our threshold of acceptable like-dislike ratio. Those videos presumably being ones that were controversial, hence the higher than average number of people disliking. I hear there might be a few videos to talk about this time. So where do we want to start? Which channel?
The way I think I'm going to do this, I'm going to talk about a couple of errors on videos that were still well received. So just still worth mentioning.
Yes.
On the UK grads crisis, there's a graph at about 5 minutes in where Italy appears twice. I'm not sure what country is supposed to appear instead of Italy on the second time, but
Okay.
there you go. On the podcast, the World Leaderboard, I made a mistake. I got my airplanes wrong. It turns out they weren't American-made jets. Don't know why I got that confused.
Oh, the India thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard about this.
I heard about this.
Yeah. I'm embarrassed.
You went in yesterday and everyone was gossiping about you and your jets.
I know. It's not my forte, the military stuff. I was so sure I read that somewhere. But anyway, no. The Indian Army uses Russian and French-made jets. And the point about Chinese military kit still stands, but I did make a mistake, so apologies for that. And then the last one is on the Iran-Iraq video. That was my video. It's a series of sloppy errors that weren't really noticed, but I still think I should apologize for them. And the first is that it's a classic error. I'm talking about the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. I said the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. It's because it's IRGC.
They are similar.
Yeah.
Similar letters, aren't they?
I know. Silly though.
Different countries.
I got Hezbollah and Kataib Hezbollah confused. Those are, they are related, but they are distinct organizations. And I probably should have said Kataib Hezbollah instead of Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And the last one is that I didn't check this when I was writing it, but Saddam died in late 2006, not 2007.
Okay, fair enough.
So yeah, 3 sloppy errors. I am sorry. That's not good enough.
Very nearly good enough though. A couple of characters off a few times.
Close.
Not quite right.
Those were the videos, the like small errors. But over on Global, there were a handful of videos which didn't necessarily have any errors in, but were nonetheless well below threshold.
Okay, let me have a look.
The first one is why the US economy is doing surprisingly well. I think that was the title of the video.
Yeah, 92.4.
Which is sort of unsurprising.
Yeah.
I don't actually think there's anything in that video that is wrong. I think people took issue with the title, obviously, because they want to say it's not actually doing that well, or it's still doing badly, one of the two. But I think surprisingly well means better than expected, and I think it is true to say that the American economy so far is doing better than expected. I mean, that's true in some very trivial sense, in that, like, you literally, Bloomberg, for instance, literally does aggregate analyst forecasts for various data releases, like inflation, and so far inflation has come on below forecasts, right? So that's better than expected in some sense. But I also think more generally, if you had told people in January, the average effective tariff rate is going to be between 15 and 20%. Yeah. And the American economy is still going to be growing at 2% year on year. And it's still going to have inflation below, let's say, 4%, which is where it is below 4% at the moment. People would have gone, that feels optimistic to me. Yeah. And that actually has come to pass. As we do say in the video, I think a lot of this is just that various things have conspired to delay the negative effects of Trump's economic policies. We do say that in the video, and I think
that is most people's complaints in the comments, right? That we are not factoring in enough the fact that, like, the real pain is down the road. But as you say, we do mention that, and I suppose it is versus expectations to some extent, because as you say, like, sure, it might not be as bad as it might not be as good as it could be, but when you consider that there are significant tariffs in place, it's equally not as bad as it could be.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not actually going to apologize for that video. I do think it is. I think it's true that it's doing surprisingly well, compared to sort of expert expectations. And I also think we do sufficiently discuss the fact that some of the pain might be yet to come in the actual video itself. But I can understand. And I think, I went into that video knowing that the dislike ratio might be a bit brutal.
I think we also had a similar pushback we did videos, at least one video similarly in the Biden era, and we got a lot of pushback saying,
we did.
The stock market's good, but that doesn't mean it's good for everyone.
Yeah.
Households, inflation, all that kind of stuff. And I suppose that is
I forgot about that. Yeah. And I think, I guess you can. We didn't talk about that in the video. We have talked about that in the previous video. We did something like, is the US economy's economic boom real, a while ago. And that we did talk about the fact that, for instance, quite a lot of recent GDP growth has been driven by healthcare spending, which, is that really good GDP growth? It's also worth noting, and there's some new data on this that you can find, I'm sure if you just Google it, it's cheapflation. But actually, one of the interesting things is that, and this was true under Biden, but it's become more true under Trump. Sure, headline inflation is not that big, but disguises the fact that actually expensive things are getting cheaper, but cheap things, your everyday, everyday things, especially beef, for instance, is getting way more expensive.
Yeah.
So I think that affects how people perceive inflation in lots of ways.
That's very fair. Interesting.
And I am actually one of those people who does think that actually that everything is delayed and that it will get worse. But I think, in lots of ways, it has, nonetheless, the American economy still has held up better than I expect, especially after Liberation Day. I thought Liberation Day would be really the end of it. And I think in actually lots of ways, and I don't like that this is true, but I think that Trump has got his trade wars with other countries have gone better than he expected, with the exception of China, where I think they went terribly.
Yeah.
But with Europe, for instance, and Japan, I guess, I think they've gone better than I thought they would.
Okay.
I think I stand by that video. I'm not actually going to apologize for that.
What else do we have on global?
Well, as you probably see, Israel-Syria.
I can see Israel-Syria 92.9.
I think, before I get into the specifics of this, I think one of the bigger issues with this is an exceptionally complicated story. And it was one of those where I really, really felt we just do have a word limit, and people are going to say, why don't you spend longer? We just have a very set production schedule. And if we'd waited if we'd made the video longer, we wouldn't have got it out in time. And I think the story would have died. I know that in lots of, you might be annoyed that we're responding to such trivial commercial pressures, but we just are, right? We're a news channel. We have to get things out when things are newsy, and we were already behind that story. We released it on Thursday evening, and the big strikes in Damascus came on Wednesday morning. So, we were still, and Thursday evening was a rush. But that's one of those videos where I did just feel really squeezed by the word limit, right? Because to fully explain that story, you have to talk about so many things.
Yeah.
Really, you have to talk about Syria's demography, which I did end up including lots of, but in an ideal world would talk a lot more about Israel's Syria policy more generally and how that has progressed, especially since al-Sharaa took over. And you have to talk about sort of the influence of Turkey, the Arab states, the US, and how they negotiate these fights. You have to talk about the inter-community tensions in the Druze minority, because that's actually a massive part of the story that we do go through very quickly. But a lot of the story is to do with the fact that one of the big Druze clerics is, for lots of reasons, is fallen out with the other Druze clerics, so starting fights, basically.
Sure.
And there's just so much. And then you also have to explain how the long-standing tensions between the Druze and Bedouin people there, because I think without explaining that, it quite quickly gets folded into this framing where the Druze are this oppressed minority, and it's al-Shara's Sunni Muslim majority government just bearing down on them.
Yeah.
And you have to explain that no, so the Bedouins are a subgroup within that wider group, and they have a long-standing history, and the origins of this fight between the Druze and the Bedouin was actually a sort of kidnappings where they someone kidnaps one, and then they kidnap some other people in revenge, and it just escalates from there. Anyway, I apologize for that. I don't really know what the solution is there, but I do apologize. I felt like that video was just too squeezed, and that if we had, infinite words, it would have been longer, and hopefully some of the concerns would have been assuaged. As I read the comments, there were broadly two things people took issue with.
Yeah.
I mean, Israel videos generally have a lower dislike ratio for really obvious reasons. But there were two things. I mean, the first was that people thought that we weren't being fair to Netanyahu and Israel. We say quite dismissively in that video, we should take the idea that Netanyahu is exclusively motivated by concern for the Druze with a pinch of salt. I think the tone is a bit catty, and I do apologize for that. But that's a consequence of the word limit, right? I didn't have enough time to go into that.
Sure.
But I completely stand by that. I think there are so many reasons to be skeptical of the idea that Netanyahu is exclusively motivated by concerns about minority rights.
Yeah.
Cough, cough, Gaza. I mean, it's not, the other reason in that particular context, by the way, that I think you should be skeptical of that is that, going back to this inter-Druze issue, there were a number of ceasefires agreed with the sort of main Druze authority and al-Shara's government. And they were broken by that one Druze leader who is Hijmat al-Hajiri. And broken by al-Hajiri, and then the Israelis would resume strikes in Damascus as well. And I think if you're striking Damascus, I mean, you might claim that's to, try and deter al-Sharaa from doing something, but I think that's implausible, and that mainly has the effect of, that's a fundamentally destabilizing effect. And if you're concerned about the Druze minority, you wouldn't want to be destabilizing what could be quite a broken state if it was destabilized. Anyway, I stand by that, because and my point there was that if they really were concerned about the Druze minority, the Israelis would presumably follow what the other Druze religious leaders are saying, which is that they wanted a ceasefire. And eventually actually did ask al-Shara's government to come in. The other thing people pushed back against is the first thing is that they said that we're being too pro-Netanyahu, too, let's say, sassy about Netanyahu. I apologize for the brevity of that bit of the video, but I stand by the general point. I mean, I do think that Netanyahu's, I think everyone knows there are lots of other reasons that he's starting wars all over the place. And I think that's the most likely motivation. The other thing people took issue with was the idea that we were too pro al-Sharaa. I think this is an interesting one, and I'm just going to say that I think my read of that situation is that al-Sharaa is genuinely interested in building a sort of pluralistic Syrian national state, right? It is nonetheless true that his security forces are comprised of a load of a disparate bunch of basically jihadist groups, right? You should just acknowledge that straight up. And it's very, and the other thing is, when we wrote this video, it wasn't clear that the extent of the atrocities were not clear, right? But it has since become clear that at least some of these jihadist groups and claiming to be part of the national security forces have engaged in appalling atrocities. I think the worst one is that there's a hospital in a Druze majority area near Sueda that was just ruined, basically. You might say, the fact that any atrocities occurred it should be blamed on al-Sharaa. I don't know. I think it's a difficult question, but I think I do still believe that basically al-Sharaa, and not necessarily because he's genuinely a sort of liberal democracy dude, but I think actually more out of self-interested reasons, right? Al-Sharaa wants power, and he realizes the best way to get power is by appeasing the US and the West and all that. And that involves creating a sort of pluralistic Syrian state where minority rights are protected. I think that's consistent with his other behavior, especially with regards to the Kurds, right? Where he has been trying to negotiate some sort of deal to fold Rojava back into Syria. So I do think he actually is motivated by that. And I think that I just feel it's a bit harsh to basically blame him for any atrocities that occur that are carried out by sort of rogue elements within his security service. It's also worth noticing that I think Sharaa has committed to some sort of investigation, and the rogue elements that were first identified have all been reprimanded by the security services. So, I don't know. I sort of stand by that. I think that at least al-Sharaa himself is genuinely trying to build or does genuinely care about minority rights. Maybe not because he's a genuinely liberal Democrat guy, but at least for self-interested reasons. So I think on both those fronts, I sort of stand by that. And I think this sort of like trope that al-Sharaa is just a jihadist in a suit, I think is a bit oversimplified, and I don't really buy into it. And I think that the evidence again for that is actually his treatment of other minorities. The last thing I'll say on this is that, you know, that's not to say that there haven't been atrocities all over the place. I mean, that the Druze thing was horrible, especially that hospital thing I was talking about, but it's probably worse in Latakia in May, which is the sort of coastal areas where the Alawites live. And there were genuinely sort of ethnic purges there after fighting broke out between basically sort of like the remnants of Assad's security services and al-Sharaa's forces. But I do nonetheless think that actually in the aggregate it has been a real success. I think you just have to imagine, you know, you can't expect a immediately perfectly unified Syria without any harm, you know, without any sort of ethnic tension. I think if you'd gone back to when Assad fell, the most likely outcome there at that point, people really did think, you know, there's a very good chance that Syria collapses into sort of sectarian infighting. You know, civil war really did seem to be on the cards. The fact that we have had, you know, some appalling human rights abuses, obviously, but nowhere near the scale you might have expected back towards the end of last year. You know, I think that I basically think al-Sharaa deserves credit for that, right? I think he has avoided both the worst case outcome and the sort of the outcome, the most likely counterfactual, the outcome most people expected, right? And I think that's what you have to compare any leader against, right? You can't compare them against the sort of perfect ideal of some unified Syrian state. You have to compare it against what do you think the most likely outcome was otherwise. Sure. So yeah, I'm going to basically just not apologize for either of those takes. And I do sort of stand by that. Although I do appreciate there's a lot of disagreement over the al-Sharaa thing. Yeah, of course. Although I just do think the evidence does push that way. And I also think any leader that's trying to unify a state has to toe this delicate line between carrots and sticks, right? You have to offer sort of autonomy to your various minority groups, but you can't offer too much such that it sort of encourages separatism. Sure. And that's a difficult line to toe, you know. It's like us with the Scots, isn't it? There you go. Well, I'm not trying to draw too many lines there, but I see one more major one on global. The Japan election video, 94.6. I also would like to apologize for this video. I mean, the main reason that like-dislike ratio is so low is because we described Sensato as far right, and obviously everyone just jumped on and said Sensato is not far right. Classic. I know. Sensato, I think, by any reasonable definition, especially by international standards, are definitely far right. I think that it depends. I mean, on economic issues, it's hard to say, but I think in putting any party in Japan on a left-right axis on economic issues is nearly impossible because Japan's economy is so mental. Yeah, it doesn't really map on nicely in any way. But on cultural and immigration issues, Sensato are definitely far right. And I think their emphasis on they are focused on immigration as an issue. Sometimes they talk about over-tourism, but actually that's a relatively recent phenomenon. For most of their existence, they have focused on the issue specifically of immigration. Yeah. Obviously, Japanese immigration rates are just incredibly low by any international standard. They have loosened up work visas, that's one of the things that Sensato have an issue with. Yeah. But yeah, by any international standard, their stringent opposition to any immigration like that is a sort of very right-wing take. It's far right. I'm not necessarily implying anything pejorative. I'm just saying that, like, if you think right-wing people generally don't like immigration and Sensato basically wants zero, that does put them on the furthest right bit of that axis. And then also, I think on cultural issues, Sensato have, especially in the past, leaned in a lot to Japanese nationalist historical revisionism, right? So a lot of their policy platform and a lot of Kamiya's YouTube channel is focused on basically rewriting Japanese history around World War II and saying that you shouldn't be so ashamed of Imperial Japan. There's an AFD analogy here, you know what I mean? People saying that, like, you shouldn't be so ashamed of the Nazis or whatever it is. And saying that actually it's South Korea and China that are evil. Yeah. Again, I think not only that particular sort of like position, but I think actually the focus on that position and that focusing on politics on revisionist history, I do think is quite sort of right coded.
Yeah.
And I think if you think that LDP are centre right, if you describe them as centre right or right wing, I think that does imply, given that Sansato are to the right of the LDP on those issues, that they are far right. So I don't really have an issue with that particular language. The one thing I will apologise for, though, is that with those videos, we write quite a lot of them ahead of time, and then we fill in the results at the end. And I think I just spent too long on the context, and I think I should have spent more on the what next. So actually, I apologise for that. In an ideal world, I would have switched that around a bit, rebalanced it.
Countries need to stop having their elections on Sundays.
I know.
I understand why.
They're pretty quick,
democracy. Well, that's true, but so many countries recently having their elections over a weekend, so you're going to do most of the work before the week before.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll say in defense of that is that I think some of those videos for our regular viewers who are more clued into Japanese politics, it can be a bit frustrating.
Yeah,
because we're doing so much context, and you might be like, well, I know about the inflation issue.
Yeah,
whatever. Those videos are sort of intended. I mean, we hope they do well. They are sort of intended for a wider audience, right? And so, you might feel frustrated that we're spending so much time on context, but actually for most of the audience, I think that's all new information.
Yeah, that's fair.
Nonetheless, I do apologize. I think in an ideal world, I would have rebalanced. Yeah. Was more than you thought to talk about, wasn't there? I mean, I haven't done much apologizing, but is that it?
That's certainly all of global. Is there any other?
No, I think
every other sounds good?
UK and EU are actually all good, because we actually did the editorial on time this time. So there weren't. I didn't.
We had one.
It's my bad. I was just saying that the last one was I had to do a month.
Yeah, it was a while.
That was a lot of stuff to do.
We are going to leave it there. We often do a Q&A segment at the end, but we have already been talking for a fair while. So we will leave it there. But if you do have any other questions, either about the topics we discussed or about our thoughts on anything, be that the company or policy or whatever else,
please policy,
then feel free to put those questions in the comments, and if we have time at the end of the next episode, we'll do a Q&A.
Yeah, and hopefully, although I am away in 2 weeks' time, so it'll probably be the week after. So
might be 3 weeks.
3 weeks, and hopefully a less controversial 3 weeks, a bit more.
Fingers crossed.
Q&A.
We're getting into summer. Hopefully, hopefully stuff still happens. Also, hopefully nothing happens. We need stuff to happen.
This is true.
Okay, thank you, Zach, and we will see you again in a few weeks' time.